Okay, chapter 2.4, summarizing categorical distributions. So often our first step in analyzing a categorical variables distribution is to create a graph for the distribution. These graphs can then help us to identify two key features of a categorical data set. One, what is a typical outcome? And two, what is the variability? It doesn't usually make sense to discuss the shape and center of the distribution since the order of the bars is arbitrary, and reordering the bars would change both the shape and the center. So two, often the typical outcome in a categorical variables distribution is the category that occurs the most frequently. The category that occurs most often is called the mode. So what is the mode for the following distribution? So we can see, in this case, the mode is the family type of car, and that has the most cars within it. Right, number three, we can also find the mode of a numerical variables distribution. So what is the mode for the following distribution of roller coaster speeds? So again, mode is kind of like most, which one occurred the most. And we can see that the speed of 50 is our mode in this data set. Right, so keep in mind that mode is not typically used with numerical variables. Sometimes it makes sense to, other times it's not as clear. That's because the mode may appear to change if the bin widths change, if you're dealing with a histogram. If you're dealing with different graphs, stem plots, dot plots, even both of those, if you change the setting on the axes, things get a little bit more jumbled and it may display what looks like a different mode. So it's better to talk about the shapes we had before, unimodal, bimodal, and multimodal. All right, number four. While the meaning of mode is the same for both numerical and categorical variables, the meaning of bimodal and multimodal is somewhat different. A categorical variables distribution may be bimodal if there are two bars of nearly identical height. A numerical variables distribution may be bimodal if there are two values that occur more frequently than the other values in the distribution. But these two values do not need to have nearly identical frequencies. So there's going to be a greater difference with numerical variables in terms of those two frequencies. Right. The same is true of the term multimodal. Categorical variables distribution is multimodal if more than two categories all have roughly the tallest bars. Again, the height should be nearly identical. And a numerical variables distribution is multimodal if there are more than two values that occur more frequently than the other values in the distribution. But these values do not need to have nearly identical frequencies. So with multimodal, bimodal, keep in mind we're not really focused just on the values themselves, but whether or not more than one exists. All right, so number five, the variability or diversity of a categorical variables distribution is not as clear-cut as the variability of a numerical variables distribution. Distribution with more variability has a lot of observations spread across many different categories and may have several different modes. Distribution with all or almost all of the observations in one category has low variability or possibly no variability. So the following bar charts show the ethnic composition of two schools in the Los Angeles City school system. And you can see these bar charts on page 55 of your text. Question is, which school has a greater variability in ethnicity? So if you want to press pause and give this some thought, you can. But it turns out that the bar chart on the left shows more diversity. And that's because there's more variability. Another way to think of this is it has observations in more than 4 categories. Okay, over on the right, we have a bar chart that shows less diversity because it has less variability. Okay, it has a mode, and most of the students in the school system fall into that one category. So again, it has less diversity. Really only has observations in 2 categories. It's almost entirely one ethnic group. Again, very small numbers in the other group. So again, School B has one mode. Most of the students are in that particular category. School A has a mode here, but the other categories also have quite a few students within them. And it has more than 4 categories as well. Okay, number 7, the following bar chart show the numbers of deaths per 100,000 people in 1 year for people aged 15 to 24 years for both males and females. What is the mode for each gender, and which gender has a greater variability in cause of death? So mode, we want to know which cause of death was most frequent for each gender. So for males, here's our mode. And note that that is for motor vehicle accidents. For females, turns out motor vehicle accidents are also the mode as well. So which gender has a greater variability in cause of death? Note that the males have consistently high death rates for all other causes of death, so there's more variability. So we've got consistently high. For all of the other causes. Over here, we've got some that are fairly low, or relatively low death rates. We've got 2 that are a little bit higher. All right, so again, we see a lot more variability over here for the males. Less variability over here for the females. Okay. One other thing I want to point out here is the scale. Notice that the scale is very different for these 2 genders. So it makes it difficult to compare across from one to the next. So number 8, by the way, we can display these 2 distributions from number 7 in the same graph. This may make it easier to compare the 2 distributions. So what does this graph show that the 2 previous graphs may not have made clear? Well, now that they're on the same scale, what's a little bit clearer is that there's a much higher death rate for males across all of these categories. So again, the death rates are higher for males in all of these categories. Notice we also have a legend or key here telling us which bar is which. So here's a male that's blue, and here's female. And just to make a note, death rates are higher for the males in all categories.